I had these two dramatically different experiences as a dad. And what I realized is that between the two worlds of my oldest son, Jay, who is now 30, and my youngest son, Sekou, who is now 10, is all the sons of society. All of these young men who are navigating the world through this lens, that have left them feeling marginalized, left them feeling left out of society. I get into the emotions of men. What does it mean to be vulnerable as a father? What does it mean to be vulnerable as a partner? I get a chance to talk to my sons about the importance of tears and why it's so important as a dad to ensure that my sons have full access to all of my emotions.
Hi, everyone. It's Dr. Alfiee here. Welcome back to Couched in Color with Dr. Alfiee, where we talk about all things mental health with a particular focus on intersectional communities of color. It is such an honor for me to have my guest here today. I'm so pleased that we are able to do this and connect. I met this guest through Charlemagne at an event. Oh boy, I've been taught it's not the criminal justice system, it's called the criminal punishment system. That's one of the things I learned from this panel that my guest and I were on together. And he is extremely well known. He's an activist. He is very clear about mental health, very grounded and centered spirit and being, and just his presence just at the event that we were at. He doesn't know this, but I'm going to tell him. The event that we were at, he really just kind of just helped me have peace like that whole time, because he was just so kind and warm and just so thoughtful and such a deep thinker. So I want to introduce my guest, and then I want my guest to introduce himself to all of you, all of my viewers and all of my listeners on the Couched in Color podcast. And this is such an honor to present Mr. Shaka Senghor. Sir, will you please introduce yourself to the peoples who don't know you because they've been living under a rock?
Oh man, that's such an incredible opportunity and a task all at the same time. But first of all, truly honored to be here and to really dive into this conversation. As you mentioned, my name is Shaka Senghor. I am a two-time best-selling author. One of my great passions is writing about real lived experiences. I grew up in the city of Detroit, hence the always present Detroit hat. I rep the city. But I also grew up in another community that we don't often talk about as community, and that is the community of prison, where I spent 19 years of my life. 7 of those years was in solitary confinement. And it was in that environment that, the reality of what we're faced with when we're talking about mental health became very present to me as a young, kid going into that environment, and coming out of that, as a young man. So, in addition to my writing, I'm a producer. I am also a tech executive, one of the few tech executives that have my background and my experience, but I'm truly, honored to be in a role where I can help other people gain access to a new industry.
Well, thank you so much for that. And what I would love to hear a little bit about more is, let's talk about these two books. Let's start there. Tell me, tell us the titles of both books so people can hear them clearly. And then if you would just walk us through for each book, how did you come to the place of writing about those specific topics? So maybe it's like the title of the book, a brief synopsis. And then, for each one of those books, tell us how you came about of that process to write those, and why was it important to put that information out there?
Thank you so much for asking about that. Writing is truly a passion of mine, and it's a passion that developed while I was in solitary confinement, where I originally started writing fiction. A lot of people don't know that about me, so I'm letting you in on one of my little secrets. But I actually started off writing detective stories, and I wanted to write about characters that were different from who I was, and that represented a different part of our experience. And those books got published while I was incarcerated. I started a company, published them from prison, got sued by the Department of Corrections for the cost of my incarceration. They actually thought that I had fell into tons of money. They didn't realize I started my own company. And what happened was there were colleges that started to pick my work up before I got released from prison. And so when I got out in June of 2010. By September, I was already doing speaking engagements around my books. And what would happen was people would always say to me, and they had the best of intentions, "You don't sound like someone who's been incarcerated." And that troubled my spirit because I thought about the incredible men who raised me while I was in prison, the incredible mentors that I had, incredible friends who some are still in prison and who I'm still in contact with today. And I said, I need to tell our story. And I need to help people understand how so many young people end up in prison. And so I decided to write what became my first New York Times bestseller, Righting My Wrongs: Life, Death, Redemption in American Prison, because I wanted to tell the truth. I was tired of seeing us, splashed across the news as the latest headline of dysfunction in our communities. And I wanted to speak to the things that lead so many of us down that path. And so I embarked on this journey to tell my story and to write about my life and my life experiences and to really talk about PTSD in a way people hadn't seen before. Prior to shooting and tragically causing the death of David, the man whose life I'm responsible for taking and which led me to prison, I myself was shot when I was 17 years old, multiple times, and had dealt with high levels of gun violence since I was 14 years old, with my childhood friend being murdered, two of my brothers being shot, one of my brothers been shot twice and paralyzed. And I wanted to speak to those truths, not to make an excuse for the decision I made that night, but to help people really understand what is happening in our communities when we see so many acts of gun violence. And the second book, my most recent book, which came out in January and is now a Porchlight bestseller many times over, is a book called Letters to the Sons of Society: A Dad's Invitation to Love, Hope, and Redemption. And the reason that I wrote that particular book, because I'm raising two sons in America. And I'm raising one son. I have an adult son who's now raising himself. But I had these two dramatically different experiences as a dad. And what I realized is that between the two worlds of my oldest son, Jay, who is now 30, and my youngest son, Sekou, who is now 10, is all the sons of society, all of these young men who are navigating the world through this lens, that have left them feeling marginalized, left them feeling left out of society. And it's really speaking to people as a whole. The focus is my sons, but the lessons in it is so powerful. I get into the emotions of men. What does it mean to be vulnerable as a father? What does it mean to be vulnerable as a partner? I get a chance to talk to my sons about the importance of tears and why it's so important as a dad to ensure that my sons have full access to all of my emotions. And it's been such a godsend. I mean, I've had some of the most incredible conversations around these two bodies of work. And in all the things that I've done, is some of the work that I'm most proud of.
Wow. I'm a little speechless because the level of transparency, the level of accountability, the level of reflection and thoughtfulness that you express just in describing the books that you wrote,
Mm.
is refreshing, and it's so important. And part of why I feel like it's so important is, and you can tell me how you feel about this, how we educate and rear and support Black men in showing that kind of vulnerability, in talking about mistakes that they've made and grown from, in having this arc from, we've all done things that, probably would make us cringe that we did them. Do you know what I mean? Or that make us reflect, or that make us think about, why did I do that? And what could I have done? Everybody's done something. And so what is it you think about your journey? All of that to me is behavioral health. Like this idea that I can say and I can acknowledge I did this thing, whatever that thing is. And at the same time, that does not, I think I've heard you say this before, that doesn't frame everything about my life, right? We're all, there's the
Absolutely.
old saying, like, we're all better than the worst thing we've ever done. Do you know what I mean? So for
Absolutely.
you, what 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 is it that happens with brothers? I'm just gonna stick with the Black men. What is it that happens with brothers in your mind that impacts our brothers so deeply that it becomes more and more difficult to express themselves the way that you just did? I was responsible for X. It made me think of Y. The context was this. And as an outgrowth of all of that, I decided to do this, that, and the third. You know what I mean? Like, what
Mhm.
happens to our brothers, and what did you do to help you to, I don't know, overcome some of those challenges?
Yeah, so I'll start with the last part, and then I'll come back to the first part. The things that I did were really a result of just having incredible mentors. There was these group of what I call my OGs. These are the older brothers who
Yeah.
are, some of them are serving life sentences. Some of them have been in prison for over 4 decades. Some of them have come home after nearly 5 decades. And these men saw something in me that was redeemable, and they
Mm.
led me to books. And I remember them first giving me Donald Goins, these gritty, very, street oriented books, because that's where I was at the time. And what they knew that I didn't know is that those books would run out. And when those books ran out, they gave me Malcolm X's autobiography. And I remember reading that book, and now in the reimagination of history, people tend to only focus on Malcolm X as a human rights advocate, a civil rights advocate, but he was so much more to me than that. He was an intellectual. He was an organic intellectual. He was curious about the world. He was examining the deep psyche of Black people in America. And so when I began to examine my own psyche, it came as a result of reading books that Malcolm was reading. He was one of the most informed people in the world. He was reading everything. He got into philosophy, and so that philosophy challenged me to think about myself. And one line in particular, I was reading Socrates' Apology, and he said, "The unexamined life isn't worth living." And I began to examine my life, and I began to ask myself these questions of like, man, how did I go from this kid who wanted to be a doctor to sitting in prison? And once I was able to be honest with myself and to be able to reassign responsibility to those who had caused me harm, accept responsibility for the harm that I had caused, life began to look totally different for me. And what I'll say is the reason that it's been so hard for brothers to vocalize how they feel is because there's a narrative that's been created about who we are.
Mm.
If you think about the heroes in Black culture currently as it exists, they exist in the world of entertainment, they exist in
Mm-hmm.
the world of athletics. If there's a
Mm-hmm.
social issue that we are faced with, the first thing people ask is, what does LeBron think about it, or what does Jay-Z have to say
Mm-hmm.
about it? And not
Mm-hmm.
that that's a bad thing,
Right.
but it's a problem when it's the only thing.
Mm.
There's so many more of us who are much more informed on issues at the root of those issues than anybody else. But there's another thing that's happening that's not being talked about. When we talk about the emotional capacity of men in general and Black men specifically, what's often missed is the reason why it's so hard for us to emotionally connect. And I want you to just kind of think about this with me, right? So
Yes. Yes. Yes.
I'm fortunate to have an incredible fiance. I got engaged in June, and it's one of the greatest experiences that I've had. And what
Yes.
makes the experience great is because I know that I'm emotionally available and
Mm.
that I'm emotionally intentional about the kind of connection that I want. But that hasn't
Yes.
been always the case. And the reason it
Right.
hasn't always been the case because from a very early age, everybody that I said that I loved or I cared about
Yeah.
was taken away from me in some capacity.
Mm.
My first childhood friend was murdered when I was 14 years old. There was
Mm.
no mental health outlet to process that. And so over the course of the years, I can't even tell you how many of my friends have been killed, have been thrown into prison for life sentences. And so when you ask the average brother, how many of your friends have been murdered before you turn 21 years old? How many of them been carted away to prison? And so if you think about all the things that we're constantly losing, it's hard to be in a space of committing when you're afraid that what you commit to can be taken away. And so because there's this singular narrative about the Black man as being tough, the Black man as being emotionally unavailable, what happens is we stop there. We don't ask why. We don't ask, why are we hurting? Why are we suffocating and killing ourselves because we can't open up and we can't talk about what ails us? We can't even talk about fully about joy. There was a hashtag not too long ago about Black men frolicking, and I loved it because
Me
our
too.
joy really
Me too.
matters. And it's so
Yes.
important to wake up and feel like a sense of joy without having to be guarded. And
Yes.
unfortunately, we just don't live in a culture where that's currently acceptable. So when I began to write, for me, it wasn't about changing the narrative, right? Because some of the narratives that exist are true. There
Mm.
are absentee fathers, but there's also
Yes.
another narrative that the CDC says we're the most present fathers of any father in the world that we don't
That part.
talk about.
That part.
So here, let me
That part.
expand that narrative, right? There is a narrative about what's happening within hip hop culture where, these young brothers are getting murdered almost, it seems, on a weekly basis, right? But there's also a narrative that, colleges are full of brilliant young black boys who are figuring out how to change the world. And so for me, it's really about expanding the narrative to include all of those conversations. And it starts with how we feel. Do we feel worthy? Do we feel good? Do we feel like we're adding value beyond our ability to provide and protect? Do we feel like nurturers? Do we feel like lovers, in the deepest, truest sense of what it means to be a lover? Do we feel available for intimacy? And like, what
Mm-hmm.
does intimacy actually mean for us beyond physical intimacy? And so for me, it's just about expanding that narrative and really bringing out those things that we just don't talk about when it comes to us.
Wow. That's the mic drop. Every time you speak, it's like mic drop. Because seriously, because there's so much there. There's so much that I think we fail to talk about and we fail to embrace about what Black men's experience is. And there's so much you gave me to think about. I was thinking about this hashtag. The one thing that you said of the many things that you said that jumped out at me immediately because it's really relevant for something I've saw on social media recently. And that is Black men's value beyond, what they can produce and protect. You know what I'm saying? Like what are you producing and who are you protecting? Like there's something valuable about Black men that's important, but outside of that, right? Like you're
Absolutely.
worthy, just like you said, to use your words, you're worthy because you're here. Like that's enough. You're just worthy because you
Absolutely.
exist. And so I was thinking about I saw it on Twitter. I ain't gonna call no names. And when I mention it, anybody who knows anything about Black pop culture and Black Twitter, they're gonna know exactly what I'm talking about. But it was about a super producer and a rapper, female rapper, male super producer. And all people were talking about was, yeah, she came up because that's her sugar daddy and she the sugar baby. And I'm just like, a lot of sisters like, get you a man who can, buy you this. I'm not gonna say the car because when I say the car, everybody gonna know what I'm talking about. I'm gonna make it up. Who can buy you this Rolls Royce? Do you know what I'm saying? Like
Right,
that's a
right.
man. And I'm like, what? You know what I'm saying? So I understand. I do. Like, I'm not going to be like an old head. Like, I'm Gen X. So I know I'm an OG. I'm not going to be an old head and be like, that's ridiculous. Because I'm sure there was a time in my life when that felt like that's what a man does. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
And to your point, supporting, like, I just thought about what does that say to brothers if they don't have money to buy a woman a Rolls Royce? Do you know what I mean? Like, should they be made to feel less valuable? Should that be the only standard of what brothers are? And I know that's not the only narrative, but it's
Yeah.
one that's so prevalent. And I feel like it's
Mhm.
so hard to overcome that hurdle because everything that our brothers are flooded with is all about what can you produce. I remember I was having a conversation with a teenager about this concept. I'm just going to be honest about my biases of a push present. So when the sister is pregnant, the brother buys her a gift for carrying and producing the baby, bringing the baby into the world. And I was like, but the gift is the baby. Do you know what I'm saying? So, like,
Absolutely.
the gift is that she sacrificed her body to carry this human and she produced, like, so you don't need to buy her anything. What you can give her is your presence at them prenatal visits. Do you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Is making sure that she's healthy and okay, is taking care of yourself. So, going back to your point as well about the narratives in the media and that whole, I remember when that research came out about brothers being non custodial parents, but being the single most present group of all ethnic groups of men, even when they don't live and are not partnered with the mother of the children. And how powerful that was for me. I have a board member for my nonprofit. Her name's Dr. Shauna Cooper. And she does a lot of work around Black men and parenting. And so
Mm.
everything that you shared is so important and it's so beautiful to me that you have that kind of knowledge and you've taken the time to gain that kind of knowledge so that every time you speak, you yourself have an opportunity to change the narrative. And so
Mhm.
I'm really curious about when you do speak, how do you find let's stick with the young brothers. Like I'm just
Mm,
gonna say anybody under 40. How do young brothers receive the word? And other people are young too, but I'm just gonna say the young like under 40. How do they receive it, and what
mm.
kinds of responses do you get when you speak to young men? The same way you just spoke to me about what the narrative is out there, what the limitations are that are placed on you, in your own story of this arc of going from having challenges, being traumatized, to doing things you weren't so proud of, to redemption, like the work that you do to rear your 10-year-old and to be vulnerable and open to your fiance. Congratulations, by the way, because I'm here
Oh,
for the
thank
black
you.
love all day, all day. But
Facts, yeah.
how do brothers receive that?
It's really interesting. In our culture, so much of our culture is entertainment driven, and sometimes it can be hard to penetrate culture on a massive level. But what I've found is that these young brothers, they love me. I'm they real OG,
Mm,
right?
mm,
And I'm big bro, and I'm unk, and I'm old head, and all the things, and I love them. I love them because I know what it looks like when you have someone with wisdom to love you. And the
yes,
brothers who raised me in prison, like I
yes,
love those brothers, because they saw value
yes,
in me. And what I found is that even in my approach to brothers, right? I always, when I see them, hey, what's going on, little bro? I never hit them with the N word, right? And
right,
and, and not
right,
that I'm like a word police or
right,
anything. I just know
right.
psychologically that when I hit them with little brother, they respond differently and they open up,
Yes,
and they want
yes,
that
yes,
affirming hug and they want that dap. And we got all the conversations and the things, but also know I have a cheat code. And my
yeah.
cheat code is that I've actually lived the stuff that most of these cats are
Mm-hmm,
rapping about. And
mm,
so because I can walk into a space as an authentic survivor, because I'm
mm,
a survivor. Like, it's not a glory thing. This
mm-hmm,
is this was
mm-hmm,
survival. What I went through, I would never wish on any of these brothers. And I
mm-hmm,
can tell you, because of the way the culture is set up, most of these brothers will not survive what I've went through. Like, this not
mm-hmm,
designed for you to survive. Like, I am not supposed to be having this highly intellectual conversation with you in this moment, because the system was designed to cripple my mind, to cripple my spirit, to cripple me emotionally. And fortunately, I had the blessing of, one, being literate, to being literate.
mm-hmm,
That
mm-hmm.
changed the game for me, because I was able to read those books that those brothers provided. And then I was fortunate to have brothers who I can debate with. Like, we had intense debates. I mean, heated debates, knockdown, drag 'em out debates, without it turning into a physical altercation. Right now, within our culture, there is so much sensitivity to what's said. Nobody wants to be corrected. Nobody wants to be held accountable. Nobody wants to be spoken to in a manner that challenges your idea of what it means to be a man. Like, I don't have anybody in my circle as friends who can't challenge me. Like, the
Mm,
moment you can't challenge me as a man, you can't hold me accountable, then we're not operating in authenticity.
mm,
And so what the young brothers see is that I live what I talk about. I don't
mm-hmm.
just hop on social media when it's convenient to retweet, repost, and act like I'm conscious and aware, like I'm in these trenches for real. I still go into prisons to this day.
Yes.
And it's the hardest thing to do. The triggering effects of the smell of that environment, the claustrophobic feeling, the antagonism of a system that doesn't want me to come in as a bearer of truth. Like, I have to penetrate that every time that I go inside a prison, but I know it's my responsibility and it's an honor. Like, I love fellowshipping with my brothers inside. Like, it's nothing like it, because there's a language, there's an experience that we have that is shared, that nobody out here can ever understand. And so what I think the young brothers get is like, this brother talks our language. He comes from where we come from, but he's challenging us, and he's actually doing it while winning. Because that's important. Like, sadly, brothers not trying to hear nothing if you don't have proof of concept, or
Nope.
at least the look of proof of concept. And so,
Yeah.
sadly, there's a lot of
Yeah.
people that look like they really handling business, and in reality,
Yeah.
their business is handling them. And
Yes.
so they disrupt this organic trust that can be being developed when it comes to the young brothers. And so I'm always figuring out, okay, how do I hack the culture in a way that, listen, not trying to be popular. I'm 50 years old, right? I have lived multiple lives in multiple spaces. What I am trying to do is uphold my end of the bargain with my ancestors, with my OGs, with my brothers who were incarcerated, that said, if I was given this opportunity, that I'm gonna tell the truth about us. And I'm gonna get
Yes.
that truth out in a way that can transform how we think about ourselves, what we see as possible for ourselves. Again, according to them, I'm not supposed to be here. And I can tell you, and this is not bragging, it's just keeping it 100 with you, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What I've accomplished in the world of tech, in the creative space, in the social impact space, in the writing space is unparalleled coming from where I come from. And it's important for young people to see like it don't your circumstances, they are what they are. But the decisions you make in relation to them, like that's the game changer. And that's for me, that's always been a game changer. And so the young brothers, they resonate with that. Like, look, let's get it. You talking about hustling, let's get up and go make it happen. But you also gotta hustle to love yourself. Like that's a different type of hustle. You gotta show up and put that work in to love yourself. Cause then when you know your value, you stop being boxed in by other people's ideas of what you can do, and the world opens up, and you feel look, anything is possible. Like my man Kevin Garnett say, anything is possible, and I truly live my life because that's what I believe.
Whew, I love that. I love that. Give us some guidance on what a process looks like to develop that kind of love for yourself. What does that look like? Because people hear it a lot. And I have a big thing about I don't always just want to tell people what they should do or what I think they should do because I'm an N of one. That's my opinion, right? So I always tell
Mm.
people you don't have to do what I say. You know, my mom, rest her soul, God rest her soul, rest in power, mama. She used to say, you take what I give you. My family's from the South. And she'd be like, baby, you
Mm.
take it with a grain of salt. You keep what you can, throw the rest over your shoulder, like for good luck. That was her
Absolutely.
thing. And so she's like, you'll have to sift through it. And so what I try to share with people is not just here are things that I think you can work toward, but here is how you can work toward those things. Here are things that I've done. Here are things I encouraged my patients to do in the past. Here are things that people have taught me. I learned so much. I learned from you when we sat together at the UJC Team Rock event, right?
Mm.
So I'm always trying to have an open ear to learn and receive information from people
Mm.
because I know it's going to help me. So in that vein, in that spirit, what would you say are some things that people can do? And maybe not everything works for everybody, but let's give them some ideas about what do we do, brothers especially, because there's something unique about that experience, but I think anybody can benefit from it. What can young men do to develop that kind of love for themselves? What does that look like? How do you do that? How do you get
Yeah,
there?
that's a great question, and there's three things that come immediately to mind when I think about my own journey. Right, one of the greatest gifts I've ever given myself is journaling, and it started with an essential question of how did I get here, and I began to write through all the trauma I experienced, and I was able to reassign responsibility. Here's the things that I'm responsible for. Here's the thing my mother is responsible for. Here's the
Mm,
thing that the person who shot me is responsible for. Here's the thing that the person who robbed me. Here's the thing that the person who beat me. And I began to reassign that responsibility. I began to own the things that I was responsible for and acknowledge how I harmed other people. And I was able to do that through journaling. And I can tell you,
mm,
it's one of the most powerful, raw, emotionally shattering experiences that I've ever experienced because it just opened me up. And I discovered this little magical being that had been covered up with all of these traumas that had nothing to do with who I was at my essence. So that journaling is one. The second thing was meditation. And I say meditate to get
mm.
it straight, you know, and,
Listen.
and it's a process and it's not an easy thing. And I began the process of meditation and it was horrifying, to sit with your thoughts in an honest way and to let them thoughts just be. Oh my God, it was like a horror show going on up there.
Mhm.
But the more I practice it, the more I began to filter them unhealthy, them toxic thoughts out. When they pop up and they'll be like, oh, that's not me, that's my mother. Or, oh, that's not me, that's this person down the street. And I started to identify the things that were me. And then the third thing I would say is like them personal affirmations.
Whew.
One of the things that I love about hip hop, like, and again, I'm as old as hip hop is old, right? So hip hop is
Right, right.
celebrating 50 years next year. I just turned 50, so I grew up with hip hop. And one of the things that I've always loved about it more than any other genre is the aspirational, affirming aspect of what it is, right? Them brothers and sisters talk into existence the things that they desire. They talk that into existence. Before guys actually had the Benzes and Bentleys and Rolls, they was talking about it. They didn't even have great deals back then, right? But it's so affirming to think of like, hey, I can do this thing. I can actually make this thing happen, right? And so for me, my affirmations are rooted in gratitude, just waking up and being like, okay, what am I really thankful for? You know, I actually have clean socks today. I actually have toothpaste. I actually have running water. And just stopping at that and being grateful for those things, right? And then when I am, affirming myself, I do affirmations with my son every night. Every night before bed, we do affirmations. And we've been doing this for almost 10 years now. And I realized in affirming him, I'm actually affirming myself. And
Yes.
I'll say this last thing. This is so interesting about our culture.
Yes.
I can
Yes.
say to you, Dr. Alfiee, you are the most amazing, incredible, stunning, beautiful, thought-provoking, charismatic, accomplished person in the world. And if somebody watched me celebrate you like that, they'd be like, oh, that brother, that's just a dope brother, right? If I
Right.
stood in front of people and said those things about myself, they'll be like, how arrogant, how egotistical.
Yeah.
And so
Ooh.
our culture confuses us sometimes. And it
Mm.
stops us from being honest about who we are. A person can come up and say,
Yes.
you rocking that purple. And our reaction to be like, oh, this little thing, we
Yeah.
we
Right.
we
Right.
downplay it, right? And
Yes.
and that hit me one day. I'm talking to my sister. This is a sister of mine. And I have
Yes.
tons of sisters, biological, non-biological. I was talking to my sister Felicia, and I complimented her on something she was wearing. I was like, man, I'm like, that dress, that's fire today. She was like, yeah, I know. And I was like, damn, that's actually dope. Like she wasn't, and she like, yeah, I know, of course it is. Like I knew it when I picked it out. Like that's.
Yeah.
And I was
Ah!
like, that's the energy. We owe that to
Yes.
ourselves. Like America has
Yes.
beat us down.
Whew.
America has dogged us. America has traumatized us. America has left us believing that we can only succeed in the realm of sports and entertainment. And so we owe that to ourselves, to affirm who we are. And so those are kind of like my three things that I'm like meditation, journaling, affirmation, game changers.
Whew. I receive it. That is what I have learned to say. I
Yeah.
receive it because the receipt of it is my acknowledgement that the universe put it out there to bring me joy and to uplift me and to give me just something to hold on to that's good, right? And everything that you said, when you exist in a society that is consistently telling you that everything about you is bad, down to the point of not only is it bad, but it's your fault. So, one of the things I always say for us as Black people is stop saying that something happened to somebody because they're Black.
Mm.
Because whose fault is that? If it's because I'm Black, what is that word that comes after because? Because, right? Whatever that word is after is the object. Because I am Black. I
Mm.
can't change being Black. You understand what I'm
Right.
saying? So it's not because I'm Black. It's because the other person's racist. Think
Absolutely.
about how that frees you up if you acknowledge that you're experiencing that lack of a promotion, the ridiculous disparities in incarceration rates for Black men and Latino men and Black women and Latinas, right? The unsolved murders and kidnappings of Native American women, like the anti-Asian hate. It's not because we are Black, Native, Asian, Latino, Latine. It's because other people are racist. You understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
And so it's you get so, and we even say it, right? So I tell
Mhm.
people, never again in your life say that something happened because of something about you. You say that that discriminatory thing happened because of something about that other person, because they can make a choice to change, but you can't change who
Absolutely.
you are. So that piece of it is the way that we speak over ourselves. And I have learned this idea of just I receiving. Now I want to start doing what Sis Felicia did when she was like, I know, child, I would love to get there. Like, okay, thank you, thank you. You know what I'm saying? I know,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it's just the idea that giving ourselves permission. And I'm gonna tell you, when you were speaking about hip hop, I'm with you. I'm a little bit older than you.
Mm,
And so I grew up with hip hop too. And I'm gonna tell
mm,
you the single greatest line to me in the history of rap. It's
mm.
like every time I hear it, I just go off. So forget Oreos, eat Cool J
OJ
cookies. I'm
Cookie.
bad.
Facts.
Man, listen. When you
Classic.
so bad that the
Yeah,
cookies need to be named after you instead of the
yeah,
Oreos, like
yeah.
you don't get any more affirming than that.
Mm,
So I'm with you on that. And that's why I love hip hop so much, because there's so much of it. I even think about Megan Thee Stallion. All she talk about is I'm fly and you want to get with me. Do you know what I mean? Now there's some stuff I don't really love, but
yeah,
everything is really about pouring into myself. And so
absolutely.
and she's a chocolate girl, right? So
Mm,
when we can do that, and we that generation, I ain't seen a whole bunch of chocolate girls like in the media being uplifted as beautiful. When we were
yeah,
young, the first one I really, really remember was like Naomi Campbell, and she's deep
yeah,
chocolate. And I'm like, okay, if she's beautiful,
yeah,
I'm beautiful. But
yeah.
everything that you're saying about the places we can go to get the affirmation. We can find affirmations and use those for ourselves. The journaling to help you really reflect. And the meditation, I'm with you on 2 out of 3. Journaling, I'm up and down. Like I hop in and out.
Mm,
But that meditation and that affirmation, I just led an exercise with my team earlier today in the
mm,
team meeting. And the first thing that we did was practice a guided meditation just to start
mm,
the meeting. And what I didn't say to them, but what I say when I speak publicly is that always gives me an opportunity to settle. When I start anything with a meditation and a reflection, I can settle and then I can show up as my best self. So I just want to appreciate you for giving us that wisdom and that guidance. And I think, rounding the curve toward the latter half of this discussion, or the latter part of this discussion, what I would love to hear a
mm,
little bit more about is to uplift you and like just celebrate these
mm,
successes you've had in these different spaces. So we heard about the books, right?
mm,
We know you're a phenomenal public speaker. You do loads of speaking engagements. We know that you're a phenomenal writer. Can you talk? Would you be willing to share a little bit with us about like the tech space and other aspects of
mm,
creativity that you're
yeah,
engaged in, and what kind of we want to celebrate it? What kind of success
yeah.
have you seen in these other realms?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm always excited to really just kind of talk about the worlds that I've explored since I got out. I've always been a curious kid. When I was a kid and I would get in trouble and get on punishment, like my mother didn't play that. You're gonna just be sitting up in there watching TV, right? And so I began to read the encyclopedia. So I know some of the most random things because I just would read the encyclopedia as a kid, but it made me
Yeah.
really curious about life. And so when I walked out of prison, shortly after I got home, I knew I had a responsibility first to mentor in our community. And I won my first award literally about a year after I got out for my leadership in our community. And then I ended up getting a fellowship to MIT Media Lab. And so imagine, if you will, I'm almost 2 years out of prison and I'm in Cambridge at one of the most esteemed universities as a fellow. And I maintained that fellowship for about 3 years. So I was able to add, to some of the innovation that was taking place there. Went on to become, a TED speaker, one of the top TED speakers of 2014. I became a TED fellow, a Kellogg fellow. I taught at the University of Michigan a class that I actually co-created and which is still being taught to this day by another system impacted brother who was in prison. And now he's teaching this class. And I do a lecture there once a semester. And then, again, being successful with the books, but I'm also creative. I'm on Nas's last mainstream album, Grammy nominated King's Disease 2. I got a chance to do a song with Nas and Hit Boy. I executive produced a film called God Said Give Them Drum Machines. We're out on the festival circuit right now. Actually, my team is over in London and Greece. They're, touring the film. We did Tribeca here in New York. We did Detroit. There's a show on A&E right now called 60 Days In. I'm one of the
Of course.
producers on that. Yeah, I'm one of the producers on this season. I also produced a show with Oprah called Released. And in the world of tech, I joined this company who originally was a client of mine. So I had multiple tech companies as clients to help them figure out their company culture. I originally joined as the head of DEI. And, honestly, that's because it's all my work in the social impact. But it really wasn't what I was interested in. I felt like I'm much more interested. And the CEO saw way more value in me as the current head of sales and success culture. And so I'm able to train and partner with our chief revenue officer and train our sales team on how to storytell when they're selling. I'm currently working with our marketing team on our new brand rollout. And just to give some context, it's just like the
Yes.
brag a little bit because I think that's important.
Yeah. Come on with it.
So our company, we are travel and expense, business, corporate travel and expense, and personal travel, right?
Got it.
And we were a rocket ship out the gate. We're growing incrementally, and then COVID hit, right? And nobody's traveling. Airports empty.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We went to zero revenue. In 20 months, we went from zero revenue to over $7 billion valuation. Our valuation is still growing. We currently have over 10,000 customers and clients. And I mean corporate customers, right? Like Unilever and Heineken and
Yes.
CAA and Netflix.
Yes.
And so I'm able to work with this incredible team. I'm able to help build out that culture. I'm able to help our team win at the highest level of startups. Like we're a unicorn startup. And soon everybody will be using our product. And so, those things right there, like that, I be hyping myself up so much. I be like, yo, bro, you
Yes.
really doing it, right?
Yes. Yes.
And what I love about that space more than anything is it's not about my past. It's about my
Yes.
intelligence. It's about my
Amen.
strategic thinking. It's about my creativity. It's about my ability to collaborate with people, to work in partnership with teams, to offer insights that come from the many worlds that I navigate, and to bring an element of coolness to the company, which we always joking about. I originally told him I wanted my title to be head of dope shit. So
Okay, Issa Rae.
that's literally what I told him. They was like, we can consider that. But I say that to say what I'm most impressed about myself with is that I'm able to use my mind in most of the things that I do. One of the things people don't know about me as a writer, one, I'm self-taught. I didn't go to any writing programs. I literally taught myself how to write because I read over 1,500 books while I was incarcerated. And another thing people don't know is that I started off self-published, and I hustled them books out of the trunk of my car until I hustled one of those books into Oprah's hands, and then that was a game changer. And like now, Oprah and I are friends, so that's probably like one of my biggest accomplishments. But it's really about belief. It's about setting your intentions, and it's about celebrating the small wins. Like I always go back to my first book I ever sold, like hand to hand. The first day I walked out of prison into the parole office parking lot, I sold my first book June
That's it.
22nd, 2010. And I've been
That's
selling
it.
books every year, every day since then. And
Amen.
so, that's just that's manifestation, it's intention,
Amen.
it's,
That's it.
positive thinking, attracting that energy.
That's it.
And and so I told you about all the wins, right?
Yeah.
I've lost way more than I've won. I've lost
Mm.
way more than I've won. I've been told no more times than you can even imagine.
Yes.
I mean, I've been told no by podcasts. I've been told no by publishers. I've been told
Yes.
no by literally institutions. I'm still
Yes.
discriminated
Yes.
against. There's things I still deal with
Yes.
every day. But
Yes.
what I say is that I see those things as obstacles. I don't see them as like impediments. They're inconveniences. There are things that I have to navigate around. They've made me tougher. They've made me more intentional about how I show up in the world. They made me a true advocate for people coming out of systems. It's something I'll always do no matter what other work that I'm doing. But I just say that because I don't want people to think that any of this has been easy. I've been writing for since 2020, so it's 23 years of taking myself serious as a writer. I've been writing longer than that. It wasn't an overnight thing. I had to hustle like nobody's business. I'm still hustling to this day. But I just say, like, continue to show up for yourself. Know that you're worthy, and if you do that, like, you'll start producing those outcomes. And you got to celebrate the small things. It's good to look at that big picture. It's good to have these crazy dreams of the big house, the car, all the things. Like, yeah, dream that stuff up, but also understand, like, those small those moments, like, those moments mean so much. Like, I never forget Prince Montgomery, who I sold that first book to.
Yes.
Every year in June, I celebrate that moment with him because he was the first person that I personally met who believed in me enough to give. And just get this context. This guy was just walking out of prison too. He
Oof.
didn't have no money. He had maybe $75, and he gave me 20 of that for my book.
Mm.
And so that moment is something I'll always cherish, because what it told me is that, if I can sell a book to a person who is just getting back to life, who doesn't have much, I can sell a book to anybody. So celebrate those small
Amen.
wins, because they'll lead to the big victories.
That is phenomenal. And it is an incredible way to wind down this edition of the podcast. And when you said that about you remembered the man's name who you sold that book to and where that
Absolutely.
man was coming from, that's so powerful, because you do have to remember that. You do have to, like, give thanks for that opportunity, because each of those smaller opportunities keeps propelling you towards these big dreams. And
Absolutely.
at some point in your life, you had a dream to publish and sell those books, and that person gave you the opportunity to fulfill a dream. And it just made me think of, I do not know this young brother's last name. There's a little white autistic boy who was
Mm,
the first person, it chokes me up when I think about it, to ask me for my autograph. And it happened
mm,
on my mother's birthday, July
mm.
17th, 2021. And I will never forget Landon. I will never
Mm,
forget that child,
mm,
because of all the people, like you said, the person who bought your book was a person who was coming out of incarceration, like you had come out of incarceration. For a little autistic boy, right? Somebody who's in
mm,
that behavioral health space as a recipient of care, to be the first person to ever say, I see something in you. And I remember, because his dad was like, ma'am, if you could please. And I'm friendly, so I was going to stop anyway, but he would be like, if you could please just sign my son's hat. He has been standing out here waiting for you for
mm,
45 minutes because he wanted your autograph. And I just thought, my autograph? And so I signed it, and he was like, thank you, thank you, thank you. Both him and his dad. And I walked away, and I just felt, I don't know, I felt like 10 feet taller, because I thought of all
absolutely.
the people. That's pure. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, that's pure. There's no pretense with this child. So I get it. I get it. And
Mm,
it is so important and valuable. So I'm just so moved and
mm,
uplifted, just like I was when we met originally, from talking to you. And I think the last thing I want to do is just give you the last word and
mm,
ask you to share with us any affirmation or anything that you use to motivate you as a
mm,
way to close this out and take us out. And right before I do that, I just want to thank you so deeply for,
mm.
like you said, being, chief of dope shit right here on this podcast, and giving me
Yes.
the opportunity to share space with you and hold space for you, with you, for this time. So I just appreciate you so deeply. And if you would give us whatever that affirming word is, I think we would all be so grateful.
Thank you so much for that, sis. So can I attach a little short story to it, right?
Yeah. Yes, of course.
So this affirming word is the words that is on the song that I have with Nas called Composer. And what it says is, I'm actually reading from my wall. It says,
Please.
keep your composure. Believe in the magic of who we are, because what you believe is everything. And what someone believes about you is nothing. And when you listen to the song, it's really about, what do we believe about us? What are the stories we tell ourselves? How do we hold it together when the world is pulling us apart? And I share that particular piece because I met Nas before I ever met Nas. On Nas's first album, Illmatic, he wrote this song called One Love. And it's a letter to a friend who was incarcerated. and I felt like he was writing to me. And years later, I mean, many, many years later, I got a chance to tell Nas what that song meant to me at one of the darkest moments of my life, one of the toughest times. I was at Michigan Reformatory, also known as Gladiator School. And I got a chance to tell him that. And what I told him was that not only did the song like really resonate with me and inspire me to go get the worst tattoo I've ever got, because at this time, tattoos weren't great in prison. And so I had this guy tattoo Illmatic on my arm. And then I just was like, yeah, throw a dog in there biting through a chain. And it turned out to be the worst tattoo. It looked like a bear trying to escape something. But it's the most important tattoo I've ever had because that song gave me wings at a time when I needed. So to come full circle, and Nas reached out to me and he asked me to write a piece for his song. And I remember writing it, and I remember him coming back to me and saying, it's poetry. And so to get that affirmation from one of the greatest poets in American history was the most affirming thing. And so those words from that song mean so much more than just a song. It's actually the mantra that I dropped my son off to school with now. So I have a theme song that I can listen to and he can listen to. And he's like, Dad, I'm going to keep my composure no matter what happens today. I'm going to hold it down. I'm going to hold it tight. I'm going to hold it close. And, I believe in the magic of who I am because what somebody else says about me means nothing. And like, that's what I drop him off to school to. And then once he's out the car, then I turn up to like Moneybag Yo, because I'm like,
right.
I'm like,
you gotta get the turn up now.
Let me throw this Jeezy on to get through this traffic and get back home. But that song really means so much. And I promise you, if you're going through a tough time, the words in that song that I'm dropping is going to become your mantra. So I just say, keep your composure, hold it down, believe in the magic of who we are. Because what somebody else believe about us is nothing. We continue to show up and we continue to show out. So thank you so much for having me. It's such a joy. You're such a light in this world. And I recognized that immediately when we met. Your family, your husband, they're so lucky to have you. And I'm sure you're lucky to have them. Continued blessings to all in your sphere of influence, and look forward to more conversations together.
I receive it. Thank you for tuning in to Couched in Color. You can check out more episodes on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and your favorite podcast apps. Check out the show notes for any websites linked to this episode, including where to connect with us on social media. I appreciate you tuning in. Remember to like, subscribe, and turn on your notifications so you'll be updated of each episode release, and visit me at dralfiee.com for all podcast updates as well. As always, I want to wish you lots of love and light, and I hope that they are always informed by good, culturally relevant science.